All right, well, thank you so much for joining me tonight and talking about lake-friendly living. I will try to do my best. It's been a minute since I have been in front of crowds, but you're all friendly, and we all love living here, so what could go wrong? So the Squam Watershed. A watershed is essentially a land mass that drains into the same basin. The watershed around us encompasses White Oak Pond, Squam Lake, and Little Squam Lake. So for all intensive purposes, I will be saying Squam a lot, but know that I mean White Oak Pond and Little Squam as well. I am not keeping them out. I love those lakes as well. It's just a little easier to say that rather than say all three names. So I'm not sure if you know, but White Oak Pond does drain into Squam Lake Pond, which then drains into Little Squam, which then goes into the Squam River, the Penny, the Merrimack, and all the way down to the Atlantic Ocean. And this is another visual representation of our watershed. All the green and other colors that are not blue are our watershed, which all drain into the same areas. Okay, so I am quite sure that all of you here have experienced the magic of Squam, be it through canoeing on the lakes, kayaking, fishing, hiking around it. Squam just has this magic that keeps us coming back. The loons are just stunning, the sunsets and the sunrises. There's just something about this place that keeps friends and families connecting into to the magic of Squam. This is a very special place, and I think we're all lucky to call it home or a place that we love. But there are some threats, and I think the world as a whole has many changing things that we would all like to better. But the threats to lakes around us and Squam include runoff. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that picture, but that is a picture from a few years ago from Range Road coming down into Cotton Cove. And when there's big rain events, the runoff, which carries nitrogen and phosphorus and other pollutants and nutrients, will run into the lake, which cause issues down the line. Now, we are also experiencing climate change, which means that we're having more periods of intense weather. So if you look at the backlog of rainfall, overall, it hasn't changed that much in decades. However, the periods in which the rain comes are shorter and more intense. What does that mean? It means that we are having longer drought periods in which our soils will desiccate and will become hydrophobic, which means it repels water, right, when they don't get enough water. And then when we have these very intense short periods of rain, what that water does, because the soil is so desiccated, it just runs over the top, bringing the topsoil with it, along with any other nutrients that might be on the ground, be it dog waste or oil from our cars or anything else. And because we are in this watershed, this basin, it all goes down toward the lake. It's essentially like a big bowl, and it's all coming down towards our lakes. Another big issue that we have is failing septics. Now, this is not because we don't care about our septic systems. It's mostly because we have a lot of old camps on Squam and our lakes. And these camps were built back when we didn't have as much knowledge. So often these septics, and I'll show you some images later, were built super close to the water's edge. And they also weren't built for year-round use. So as we are now staying here longer, I know I am, I'm here year-round, and we're using these beloved places more, those septics need more maintenance. So I'd like you, if you know anyone or if you do have a septic system that is older and it is closer to the lake, that's something to think about as an investment for the future. Other threats that we have, and we don't see this one, the fertilized lawns, going all the way to the lake as much on Squam. We do see it on other lakes around us. But what happens is that these beautiful green lawns that go all the way to the water's edge, they need fertilizers, and they might have animal waste. And grasses have very short root systems, which I'll show you as well later on. But they don't capture the water that's coming through as we have rainfall. So it creates this sheet flow. So even though you don't see the water moving over top of it, maybe on a super, super wet day you will, but it creates this sheet flow underneath, and it's like an underground sheet of water that goes straight into the lake, carrying any of those extra nutrients if this was a fertilized or hydro-seeded lawn. So that brings nutrients into the lake. De-icing salts. Now, we live in a very cold place with some very interesting winters, so obviously we do need to salt our roads. However, there are specific ways to do it in a way that is lake-friendly. So if we know that there's going to be periods that the weather is too cold for the salt to actually do anything against the ice, then you don't need to salt as much. Or if we know that there's warm rain coming, we don't need to put as much salt. And then as property owners near the lake, then you also want to be very mindful of the salts that you use. I mean, there are so many places that I'll go and you just see these massive crystals and just bunched up in places. And that is completely unnecessary. You could use a quarter of that and just make sure you spread it around, and that'll serve a much better purpose. And lastly, invasive species. I know you're all aware about invasive species. At the Squam Lakes Association, we do a good job at managing the milfoil, which is unfortunately an invasive species that came onto our lake, and at this point it's more of a management thing rather than a let's get rid of it entirely. I'm not sure if that will be possible, but we keep trying. However, there are new invasive species that we need to be aware of. And one of these is the spiny water flea. Does anyone know about the spiny water flea? Hey.
I have, you told me about
I did. Right. Okay, so a handful of you, but most of us don't. The spiny water flea, oh, and I was supposed to bring one, I'm sorry. But if you stop at the SLA, we have a sample of one. It is not in our lake, thank goodness, but it is about between 4 to 6 millimeters long. And it's got that very large eye, so it is hard to capture because it tends to evade nets. But it is a very effective predator, and it predates on zooplankton and plankton within our lake communities. So what does this mean? It means that it is affecting the food web. It is such a great predator that it will eat all the zooplankton and making that niche for the smaller fish to starve. There's not enough food. In the ecosystems where spiny water flea has come into, there is not enough food for the smaller fish, which then affects our larger fish, and it affects our fishing. So that's something that we want to be aware of. And the other thing that it does is it's got that very long, skinny tail, and it's made out of silica. And so the fish that do predate on them, often it causes internal damage by puncturing their swim bladders and their gills, and it's just a nasty little creature. And we do have it in Winnipesaukee, Newfound, and Winnisquam. So that highlights the importance of us to continue that clean, drain, dry program that New Hampshire Lakes is well known for. I mean, the state of New Hampshire, sorry, the state of New Hampshire. So the question was, thank you. The question was, how does it move into the lake ecosystems? It is often transported in ballast waters, so boats that can take in water and then expel it. It also can attach itself to hulls and very often to fishing gear. So, and often it's the fishermen who alert us of it, because when they pull up their line, there's these these aggregations of clear things on it, and the fishing community is a little more aware, I think, than most boat users about this species. The question was, does it live in the rivers? That's something I'll have to look up, but I assume it can. So another thing that we are concerned about are algal blooms. Now, cyanobacteria, I want to preface by saying cyanobacteria is not the bad guy. Cyanobacteria occurs naturally in our ecosystems. It is when we have the perfect storm of warm weather, excessive nutrients, and just long sunny days that there is an excess in cyano growth. And it is when these cyanobacteria grow at an exponent scale, and then they run out of nutrients and they die off, that they float up to the surface, and that's when we call it a bloom. So these lines, these green lines here, that awful mess over there, this is cyanobacteria that is in the process of dying. Now, not all cyanobacteria produces toxins, but some of them do. And when these toxins are produced, as the cells die off, it can be released. And that's when, say, if our dogs go in the water and it gets on their fur and they lick their fur, they can get sick. Or if it gets on our skin, it can be an irritant. Or if we breathe in the toxins, that can cause health issues. It is a photosynthetic bacteria. The question was, is it a bacteria or an algae? So it's a photosynthetic bacteria.
Even though they call it an algae.
Right. So it acts as like an algae, but it's bacteria. And I'm not sure if any of you noticed last year, but there was toward the end of August, we kept seeing these little like snowflake balls in the water, especially towards Sandwich, past Mooney Point. Yeah, so that is another naturally occurring cyanobacteria, which is called Gliotrichia, and that's that middle top photo. And Gliotrichia does not produce toxins very often, but it could. So the SLA has been working hard in making our lab more robust. So we just ordered this new lab equipment that will allow us to quantify and also understand if there are toxins being released by the cyanobacteria when there are blooms. So usually we get a sample and we send it to DES, but before that we will ID it. Sometimes we quantify it, but then we send it to DES and they'll say, you're right, it is Gliotrichia or it is microcystis. And, but they don't measure toxicity because they're so busy and understaffed that they might do it in the winter, but honestly at that point that information is not very useful to us. So what the SLA wants to do is to have this real-time information so that we can alert our users, hey, this area of such and such lake has a toxic bloom right now. Be sure to keep your pets out of the water. You might want to go canoe somewhere else. And that 113 number, that is a DES statistics, and that is the number of lakes that have been estimated since 2004 in the state of New Hampshire that have been affected at one time or another by cyanobacteria blooms.
Out of how many lakes?
About 1,000. The question was out of how many lakes, and the answer is about 1,000. In a year, in a summer, we get between 40 to 70 active blooms, and that is often repeat lakes. So you might get, I don't know, 10 times, and I'm just putting out a number, 10 times out of Moultonborough Bay in Winnipesaukee. That might not even be a bay, I don't know. Yeah, so the comment was that this is more of a symptomatic issue, And that is something that we might be creating. And yes, so as our lakes get more developed, as there's more nutrients getting input into the lake, this causes, again, these certain scenarios where these naturally occurring bacteria will grow, it will thrive, and then eventually die off and cause these issues. So I guess what I want to say is that we want to protect our legacy. You know, some of us may have come to Squam a year ago and fallen in love and decided to make this a place that we want to frequent. Others have been coming our whole childhoods, maybe in the summer. And others are part of multi-generational families that keep coming here year after year and making this place our home. What all this goes to is that I think it is our duty to make this our legacy and continue the betterment of the lakes. So I'm not sure how many of you are aware of, but back in the late 1800s, most of New Hampshire was deforested. It was farmlands, and there was a lot of trash and nutrients going into the lake. I've heard stuff about animal carcasses, forestry waste, and even tires and cars being dumped into the lake. And it took a group of individuals who wanted to get involved. They wanted to clean the lake. They wanted to use the lake for recreation. And all of a sudden, generations after that, we've got this beautiful lake, which currently, or at least from the last, and I'm forgetting the name of the study, but it was a federal study. Squam Lakes were deemed in the top 10% of the cleanest lakes in the nation. Now, this is up there in comparison with glacial lakes, lakes that are way up in the mountain where there is no development. I must say that the measurements of the water quality are taken in deep spots. So this is reflective of our deep portions of the lake. It is not reflective of our shorelines. And the development affects most of our shorelines. So yes, we have one of the cleanest lakes. Let's keep making it cleaner, especially around the shorelines. And let's make this the legacy for our future and our future generations, and so that they can keep educating those who come after us. So how can you help? And I'm going to go into a lot of this, and someone at some point give me a 10-minute warning, because I could talk about this forever. But one of the big things we can do, and that has been done around Squam, is land conservation. So people who are large landowners, they have put portions of that land into land conservation, and that allows for the water to be managed differently, and I'll go into a little bit of that. You can schedule a LakeSmart visit with me, and I can come to people's properties and talk about the different things.
Isn't that ours?
So Charlie asked, is that ours? Yes, that is our award, honey. Thank you for noticing. Yeah, so during the summer, we stay at a cabin on one of the islands on Squam Lake. And we did, before I started working for the SLA, this was not, something that I got under the table, we did receive a LakeSmart award. But a lot of it is because it's such a small island that we do not have a septic, we do not have parking lot, and we don't, there's a lot of things that are avoided in terms of runoff. But thank you, Charlie. That is our award. So you can schedule a LakeSmart visit. I am happy to come over and look at different areas that could be improved, and also celebrate the areas that you're already LakeSmart. Get your septic inspected. I'm going to mention this at least one more time. That is a huge one. And stop fertilizer use. If you do use it, I promise lawns do not need fertilizer. I know that The one at the house that we currently live in has not been fertilized for at least 30 years, and it is green today. And then you can transition to a natural lawn. We'll talk about that a lot more, and just support your nonprofits around here. You know, we're doing a lot of work to try to maintain our lakes healthy. So I did mention land conservation. So this is a comparison of our lake and not our lake. And not Winnipesaukee either. It's a different lake. So the way that water moves in areas that are forested or that are conserved is much more different than areas that have roads and a lot of roofs and impermeable surfaces. So the water in conserved areas will fall onto the trees, hit different surfaces, start, soak up the leaves, get absorbed into the soil and taken up by the roots and the plants of the trees, and eventually get pushed down towards our water table. Areas that are developed, we get water that goes onto roofs, it moves through roads and parking areas, and it'll not only pick up speed, but it will also pick up nutrients and move toward the lake in a much quicker manner, and it will also warm up. So water that goes onto developed areas, it will cool down, and then it will replenish those streams throughout the whole year, throughout the whole summer. Versus developed lands, it will warm up, it will get into culverts in different areas and move into the lake at a faster pace, and it will be warmer. And warmer water and polluted water affects the native wildlife and ecosystems, starting at the zooplankton level. This was just a graph that explained that in a much simpler manner. So what can you do? So this is a little bit of that LakeSmart assessment, and I'm just going to talk about certain areas that we can work on as individuals around our properties. So for paths, this is an example of a path that is well-worn, well-loved, and it's compacted. So over the years, as we walk through these same paths and we clean off the debris, they get compacted, so they really can't deal with the water runoff as well. And whenever there are rain events, it'll start creating these gullies and pulling the topsoil and any other thing that is there and going down toward the lake. One of the ways to fix this, and there's different ways as well, but would be to use infiltration steps. So these are these box steps that are rock-filled, and it not only directs the users to go down a certain path and makes it an easier path to manage, but also it creates this area where water gets infiltrated to the ground and it is not causing erosion right at your waterfront. So the question was, can we place wood chips? Yes, wood chips are fantastic. My preference is to keep the leaves and the pine needles in place because that's inexpensive and it just blends in with the background. But if you want something that's a little maybe more visual to your, visually appealing to your aesthetic, wood chips are great. And wood chips are another way to make these paths better. You can also install water bars, or they're just these little things that will direct the water into the plants. And I'll talk about this in another section as well. But there's a lot of different options. This is an easy one to visualize. Roof runoff. So we all see the water coming off of our roof, but it's not always that we look at the ground impacted below. And this is an image, and I'm not sure that you can all really appreciate it, but there's a compacted gully here, and this is coming off of a roof of a house here on Squam. And so this not only compacts the ground, but it also makes the soil come loose, and it moves off of that area, and as the rain comes, it'll move it away from the house toward the lake. So nice G right there. There are different things that can be used. So you can install gutters, and maybe a French drain, which will deliver the water underground under some plants that you want to receive that extra water that could uptake it. You can use dry wells, rain gardens, or rain barrels. There's different plants that are very hardy that can withstand that force of the rainfall. And you can also, I forget the name for it, and I forgot to put it here, but a very easy solution is just to put like a 1.5 foot strip of these little stream pebbles. And that will not only take that force of the water, but it'll help it drain, and it won't cause any more soil erosion. Driveway erosion. Now, driveways are a little tricky. You know, we have two different types. We have different dirt. We have dirt roads or gravel roads, and we also have paved roads. So people often ask me, well, which is better? Honestly, they both have their pros and they have their cons. It's just what you prefer in terms of your aesthetic and how much maintenance you want to give it. So if you have a gravel road, you want to make sure that it is properly crowned, that it's got infiltration trenches on the sides. You can, if there is water erosion, there's things like water bars that can be added. Another thing that you could think about is permeable pavers, but I feel like those are probably better used in parking scenarios or in paths. And, or you could use pervious or porous materials. But if this is what's happening in one of the roads near you, you really want to pay attention, because that's a very bad example. It is a road being washed out right next to a stream. So septic systems, here I am again. As I mentioned, a lot of cottages were built a long time ago, and their septics that were only supposed to be used during the summers were put, and I kid you not, I've seen them as close as 6 feet as close to that to the lake. So if you think about it, our soils here in New Hampshire are not the best suitable in terms of drainage. Septics tend to kind of move out of that area, or whatever the effluent terms, to move out of that area because of the type of soil that we have. So if you have a septic system from an old camp that is 6 feet from the shoreline, you can only imagine what you and your family might be swimming in. So in terms of tips and solutions is, number one, adhere to the setbacks. I believe it's at least 75 feet from the shore nowadays. So if you have a septic that is closer than 75 feet, you might want to consider, you should consider moving it back. If your property line ends before 75 feet, and I was just talking to someone whose neighbors have that issue, talk to your neighbor and they will likely say, sure, for a fee, you can put your septic on my land. And this is something that I just talked to someone here, in this building today, and that is what is happening with their neighbor. They are installing the septic on their property because their land is not set back far enough for the septic to be in a proper place, or far enough from the lake, I should say. You would want to pump this every 2 to 3 years, depending on usage. I know some areas around Squam, not close to the lake, but that might get a lot of guests throughout the year. They might have to pump once a year. You want to inspect that by a professional every 1 to 3 years. I would suggest that when you do get it inspected, request for a report. I have seen reports that is just on your receipt that says, looks good. So what you would want on your report would say, no root damage, looks like it's working properly, different things. And again, upgrade those older systems. Beaches. Now, this is not a Squam beach. I didn't, I wanted to include a very exaggerated view of a beach. There are very few beaches that are naturally occurring on the lake. You can usually see those toward the end of the season when the water has drawn down and you see these lovely little beaches. However, most of the beaches that are used around our lake or in other lakes are man-made, and sand is added not every year. They have permits that's between 5 to 8 years you can add some sand. However, that sand is not local. It often includes salts, which, as we already mentioned, salts can affect native ecosystems. It can affect the fish. It can create more nutrients that would promote algae growth. And as you can see, whenever there are rain events, these beaches will erode back into the lake. And even though you're not supposed to be raking anything, I know for a fact that many people who have beaches will bring the sand back out. So that's, again, you're disturbing the sediment, causing another extra release of nutrients into our lakes. So a solution would be these perch beaches, and this is what we are suggesting as part of the LakeSmart program. Now, if you have a beach on your property, I will not say you will not be LakeSmart unless you have a perch beach. I know that this is a huge investment. However, in the long term, for the health of the ecosystem and also your property, this would be a worthwhile investment to make. And someone at one point mentioned, oh, well, you know, I have my toddler coming to visit and I really want them to experience the beach and be able to move down toward the water. Well, as I would experience this with my kids, I think having a beach like this would provide them plenty of opportunities to climb up and down those rocks and have a whole different experience. And I do think it looks quite nice with that property, with this terraced yard and perch beach. So the comment was that you know that DES is not permitting any.
What is DES?
Department of Environmental Services of the state of New Hampshire. Yeah. So they're not permitting any new beaches unless they're perched. However, there are those beaches that have been established, so they get this grandfathered in law.
New beaches.
Yes. But if you do have one of those beaches, you might want to explore the option of it being a perched beach. By the way, I saw a property last year where they had a perched beach, and in the back wall there was another wall, and it had this cubby, and they had not only speakers on either side of the perched beach, but they had a little mini fridge. That seemed like the perfect sunset spot. So parking, this is where I'm talking about asphalt and non-permeable surfaces. So it can also be thought of as like if there are any paved roads or driveways. As you can see here, whenever there's those big rain events, that water will accumulate there, and eventually it'll have to go somewhere. So it won't go on its own. It'll pick up those oils. It'll pick up that dirt, whatever, plastics come off of the tires, and it'll move it quickly off the property. Now, what can we do? So there's options as if you are thinking about installing one. You could do permeable concrete or porous asphalt, which will allow the water to drain down toward the water table. You could include permeable pavers. There's ones that they're quite interesting. They have these little wells where you would plant grass. So not only is it providing a structure for your vehicle, but also it's drawing the water in and down. Again, limit the salt use during winter. I find that a lot of people at Squam only use sand. Not everyone, but I think a lot of us are aware about that. And then you can also add plant and tree buffers around your parking areas. So this is a New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services image. They have, and I don't know if you can all read it, but this is the lake, this is the waterfront buffer, this is the woodland buffer. So 50 feet from the lake, you are allowed to create, I believe it is a 6-foot path. So you want to keep all the plants there. You're not allowed to remove any of the natural vegetation. And then 150 feet to 50 feet, you need to maintain 25% of the woodland buffer. So what does that do? That really helps slow down the water and absorb the water before it reaches the lake. The way I like to think about it is like a coffee filter. So imagine you have your coffee filter and it's these roots of these plants. The better woven this coffee filter is, the more solids and nutrients it will capture. The less plants you have, the looser those roots will be, and the more nutrients will go toward the water. So this is the law. Not everyone follows that. This image was taken on Squam. And this is what people from other lakes call the Squam aesthetic. So this is a beautiful waterfront buffer that you see right here. It's all these bushes, these young trees, and you've got your cottage in the back. They still have a view because, and then they have the woodland buffer around it. And it blends in with the scenery, and yet you have this beautiful home where you can still look out to the lake. And so this goes into that shoreline pruning and plants. So for shrubs and ground cover, you should not cut below 3 feet. And then for larger trees, it is encouraged or recommended to trim the bottom third of it. So what does that do? It maintains this shoreline buffer, as beautifully seen here from another house on Squam. But also you have that great view of the lake. So these people have installed this little sitting area, another perfect place to have your cup of tea and look at the lake and listen to the loons. And also have some privacy, right? And what did I do? If you look at this as well, so this is an example of grass. Look at those long roots from the trees. They are not only protecting your shoreline, but they are directing that water down and also absorbing a lot of the water. Now this is an example of a grassy area. It also has a plant buffer. This is not my preferred way, but listen, we do like to play Frisbee. We do like to have areas where the kids can run. Like, lawns are not bad. It is when you can include a shoreline buffer, which is like this pollinator garden, that it can be all right. We can have them, it can still be beneficial to the lake, and we can still enjoy our property and also provide an ecosystem for wildlife. And again, please don't fertilize. You can transition to a natural lawn. The way to do this is you can mix in clover seeds, which I know some people don't like clover, but you can also add, is it lilac that has that tiny little purple flower? Not lilacs. Thyme? No, but there's another one.
Is it a vine?
No. Say that again. Endangered lady slippers. Yes, but those grow mostly in like wooded areas.
You're talking about
Violet. That's it. Violet. And the bees love them. And they also are nitrogen fixers, so they will help your lawn look greener. I have pointed it out to certain people, and where I say, look, you've got clover right there, and they say, oh, I meant to pull that out. And I said, no, but honestly, look at it. There's a perimeter of green around it. And sure enough, there's like a 3-foot perimeter that is green versus the rest of the lawn, because it was a drought last year, was brown. So there is a benefit to transitioning to a natural lawn. And I've got a couple of images of the root systems here. So we've got grass, which the longer you keep your grass, the longer the root system will be. So I suggest that you cut or you get your property managers to allow that grass to grow longer, because that will be a longer root system. But if you keep it pretty short, that root system will be very short. And again, that water will just be undermining and going straight toward the lake underneath. And these are different root ecosystems. This is coneflower, echinacea, and other plants. But you can see that, again, not only can they absorb more water, but they are directing that water to replenish our water table. And same goes with non-natives versus native plants. So plants that we use for our landscaping often have these shallow roots that just spread toward the surface. Versus if you choose a native plant, not only will it be more beneficial to the pollinators, but also they have longer roots that will keep your soil in place. So the question was, will having these plants that have longer roots lessen the chance of people's wells running dry? So yeah, they encourage that groundwater recharge. They will move the water down deeper into the soil, and hopefully we won't have as much drought as we did last year. But yes, if you plant these around your property, it should help at least the water table around you to stay replenished. So yards in the fall, we get lots of leaves. And the big thing that I'll push here, and I know that I have changed at least one point of view in this room, is do not use leaf blowers. I know they're so much easier and they take up less time, especially if we're paying someone to do it. But using a rake is a lot better. And why is that? It is because leaf blowers, not only do they effectively move the leaves and little sticks out of the way very quickly and effectively, they also suspend the solids that are on the ground into the air. Not just today, I was pulling out of the driveway and I could see someone leaf blowing like half a block away because there was this cloud of dust. I didn't even see the guy, I just knew because there was this cloud of dust because they're suspending all these solids. And not only is it bad for us to breathe it in, but any little breeze will send all those nutrients, phosphorus, nitrogen, and any pollutants that are attached to it to the lake. And again, what does that do? That fuels the potential growth for cyanobacteria. But you can mulch your leaves back into your lawn. So when those leaves fall, you can just run your mower and it'll cut up those leaves and it will put in nutrients back into your lawn, but also protect your lawn through the winter. And you can also rake those leaves into your garden beds instead of, I don't know what it is, but here in New England, we love to put our gardens to bed. And what does that mean? Clean everything off, cut off all the plants, bring it all to the dirt. So if you leave the leaves, this will act as a blanket for your garden beds, for the bulbs. And it also creates an overwintering habitat for our native bees and beetles and all these little critters that we love to see in our gardens. So now to the success stories. So I showed an image of Range Road a couple of years ago, 2-3 years ago maybe. And this is what it looked like in March 2024. It was right after winter. We were having snow melt and rain, and we see this eroded dirt road heading straight toward the lake, pulling off all this nutrients, all the salt that was used in the winter so that the road wouldn't ice up, all the dirt that was used to crown that road. I mean, these roads need maintenance, if not yearly, every 2 to 3 years. So we worked very hard with the Range Road Association, and all the neighbors came together, and the SLA helped as well, and we were able to come up with the money to fix and pave. Again, I'm not saying that paving is a solution to everything, but in this instance it was, for a lower portion of Range Road. And I don't know if any of you commute through 113 in the winter. Yeah? But you weren't here a couple of years ago. Does anyone remember that ice and dirt coming onto 113 and just causing this terrible slick spot where I know I'd be praying that no one was coming on the other side of the road because that would have been an issue. I usually went onto the other lane, and because the other spot was just this massive block of ice. Well, since we've done that, so this is right after it was installed, and we used Randy Eastman and another local group for paving. But they banked the road so that it would move the water off toward the plants. And then as it got closer to 113, it directed it into this rock swale. Now, today, so 2.5 years later, so this was April 1st, we still see some dirt, sand, that was presumably used this winter for the road not to ice up. But as you can see, all that sediment is effectively being pushed into this rock swale. Now, this is not a system that will just maintain itself over time. This or next year, that area will have to be cleaned out and the rocks placed back in place. But at least as the further you go into this rock swale, there's less solids that are making it its way toward the culvert that goes straight into the lake, which is right here. So this system is working effectively. So another success story, and this is a community project, and this was done about 3 years ago with Sandwich Town Beach. This area is so well loved that the plants were loved off of it. So we wanted to recreate and add that plant buffer back into the beach. So we brought the community of Sandwich, we brought volunteers in the AmeriCorps, and there was a big effort into stopping the erosion before it gets to the lake and adding more plants. Now this year, the plan is to reassess, and I have plants already on order, and as long as the town of Sandwich wants to work with us again, we will be adding more plants this summer or spring. And our other community project, community effort is coming up at the Holderness or Livermore Town Beach. Sorry that it doesn't look very nice, but the town of Holderness would like to, over time, make their town beach a LakeSmart property. This is a conservation, this piece of land is in conservation, and so there are 3 different groups working to make this a LakeSmart property. And the big push is that we now need volunteers. So the big dates for volunteers are May 8th, 10 to 12, and May 30th. May 12th, we have a school group that's full. But Wendy from the town hall is asking for anyone that would like to join to please sign up. You can email her. And the first order of operation of things that we need to do is pull invasive plants. We will be creating these fire hose water diverters to use on the road. So it's some of the stuff that I mentioned before, but these are used out of old fire hose that is filled with sand and then staked onto that dirt road, and it will move the water into wooded areas. And eventually we will be looking into creating a much better path that won't be as compacted and eroded, and also creating some areas for planting for rain gardens, plant buffers, and later on we'll look into if we can do anything with parking. But these are the things that are coming on next, and we would appreciate volunteers. Can I tell you any of the plants that we used at the Sandwich Beach? Let me see if I recognize any of them. I was not there, but it looks like they have some native, there are blueberries for sure, but there's some sort of conifer there. And honestly, I do not know. I would have to look it up. But I do have a lot of water-loving plants coming. Some of them are buttonbush, blueberries. I really love, and it's hard to get that low-ground blueberry. That one is hard to purchase, but it can withstand people walking on it, and it doesn't obstruct your view. It's a great ground cover. And I do have a list of of plants, native plants, and where they can go, you could just shoot me an email and I can send you that whole list. It's a great list to have. Any other questions? Oops. Okay, so the question was, is the state of New Hampshire considering using beet juice as a de-icing product? I have not heard of that. There was a webinar not too long ago, and they did not mention it. Okay. Well, if you have any information, I'd be happy to look into it. Probably not. So the question is, what is the fabric of the fire hoses? Anyone know? Nylon weave. I assume it's got some sort of fire retardant. Yeah, probably not great, but at least it's getting a second life. I would have to look into that in more depth. So the question is, are there any town ordinances or state laws that limit the use of fertilizers at the water's edge? Anyone know?
Yeah, Polly, I thought that was integrated in the Shoreline Protection Act.
Yes. However, it might be, she said it might be integrated into the Shoreline Protection Act. It might be. However, there isn't any enforcement. So what the gentleman was saying was that legally for Holderness, you cannot have a lawn that goes all the way to the lake now. If there are any, they might have been grandfathered in. Is that the case with all lawns on our lake? I'm not sure. I don't think I've been here long enough to know. But I think as individuals, this is something that we need to change in a personal basis. Or maybe encourage your neighbors to sign up for a LakeSmart. Any other questions? So the Canada geese, do they have an adverse effect to the ecosystem? I mean, they are providing their own natural fertilizer to the lawn. So someone was asking me, how can I get rid of the Canada geese on my property? You can get rid of your lawn. Although I have heard some other very innovative ways of trying to discourage them to be around. But yeah, they do, I mean, they poop a lot, so that will wash down toward the lake. And again, lawns don't have that great capacity to retain those nutrients. Any other questions? Yeah, so the question is, she's got some trees that naturally drop leaves and pine needles into the lake each fall. Is this something that we should worry about? At this point, that tree is part of the ecosystem, and it is doing more positive work than it is doing negative. You would naturally, if we were to have no homes on Squam, there would be a lot more trees dropping leaves into the lake. And this would still be a self-sustaining ecosystem. And so I don't think you need to worry. You definitely please do not rake the leaves out of your lake once they've fallen in. That's fine. Don't add leaves to the lake if you're raking them, and don't blow them into the lake. But if they fall in place, just let them be. Right, so do we as SLA have a program to deal with salt use and maybe have some unsalted sand? We do not. We do, since I've been around, we haven't actually actively approached the towns and discussed salt use. I think it may have been done in the past, but that is something that is on our to-do list. I do know that at least the town of Holderness does educate themselves. Yes, that's my answer. The question was, are there any updates about Plymouth State's sampling for DDT hotspots on the lake? As I recall, these studies were done a while ago. This was something that the Loon Preservation Committee was very concerned about. I do not think there have been, or I know for a fact that there haven't been any further studies. We have been approached to look into more studies and possible remediation. The work for that is in the millions. But we are looking, this year the Squam Lakes Association, and you might have read about this, but we did start a pilot project to study some stream tributaries, and they do include one of those hotspots. And so it'll be interesting to see what we see in the water chemistry. We are not looking at sediments, we're looking at water chemistry. And as far as I understand, those contaminants are buried in the soil in these areas that aren't very disturbed. Were we to dig that up, would it re-release them into the ecosystem? There's a lot of questions about that. But the short answer is no, we have not. As far as I know, PSU has not resampled those areas. Any other questions? Webster, didn't you have a question? No? Did you forget?
Well, you said to tell you when 10 minutes.
Oh. And I'm over my time, I assume now? Okay. Oh, we've been here for an hour. Thank you so much for your patience, everyone.